Welcome to the YWEA podcast. Today we are talking about strategy and location. An increasing number of companies find that their success is more and more not only a function of their own decisions, but also of the local business environment that they operate in. The research in this area was conducted to better understand the link between business environments and company strategies. We are here with Christian Ketels, member of the Harvard Business School faculty at Professor Michael Porter's Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness. Christian, thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
What is the relation between globalization and a company's location?
Yeah, I think globalization has a two-sided effect on a company's location. So first of all, there is a competition effect, and then there is the internationalization effect. So what's the competition effect? Globalization really has meant for a lot of companies that the extent of competition and rivalry they're exposed to has risen dramatically over recent years. And we've seen that in many countries, that companies that used to compete only with their peers in basically the same business environment around them are now faced with companies that come from very different business environments in other locations. So that's one of the strong effects. The other effect is really that you now have a huge chance of internationalization. So if you have something useful, if you have some competitive advantages, you can now project them to a much wider market. So we've seen, small startups that in the past would have taken many, many years to build up and reach larger markets to really be able to scale up very quickly and kind of reach out to new markets. So we have the balance of these two effects. So globalization doesn't mean that your business automatically kind of jumps up in profitability or goes down in profitability. It really depends on, do you have something unique to offer? Then the globalized marketplace is a much more inviting environment for companies.
How can a company be competitive in the global market?
Well, I think the real core is really to have a good strategy. So I think what you really need, and I think that sounds like a cliche, but I think the market is less forgiving nowadays. If you don't have a unique value proposition, if you don't have something specific that consumers or your customers really like and that distinguishes you from the competition, it's harder now to really get away with it. So in the past, when you had smaller markets and you didn't have globalization, not as much competition, you were probably the only show in town. So people just had to buy your product or get your service because there wasn't that much choice. Now there is lots of choice. So at the core is really you have to have a good strategy at the heart of your company. The second step then is, okay, how do you harness the opportunities that globalization and the internationalization agenda give you? And that has a lot to do with how do you organize your value chain, really your set of activities that support your strategic positioning in the marketplace by tapping in the unique advantages of different locations. So how do I make sure that I tap into the right knowledge pool, whether it's Silicon Valley or it's somewhere in China or Brazil or Italy, and then tie this together? I think that's really what the globally most successful companies have been able to do. Have a good strategy to start out, and then have a global strategy that really brings the advantages of global locations together in the activity net that support the positioning that you have in the market.
What is the impact of a company's original location on its strategy?
I think what you find is that, of course, in principle, companies are completely free to set the strategy as they want. But they do this in a given context. So I think they look at specific opportunities more than they would look at others. So one of the things, to pick a specific example, I looked for a number of years back at a Norwegian company, Fast Search and Transfer. Fast Search and Transfer is pretty much like Google. They have a very good search engine on the internet. But these guys are located in Norway. They're at the Norwegian Technical University and kind of came up with their algorithms. So the marketplace that they had, outside of their door was very limited. Norway is a small market. There wasn't really that much to do. They didn't have much experience, as many other Norwegian companies, with mass marketing and really reaching out huge groups of consumers out there. Google, on the other hand, huge US market, very different environment. So what Fast Search and Transfer decided to do was, not compete with Google in the mass market for search, but basically develop a tool that they then gave to company intranets and put into technology that other companies were using. And I think that was a strategic choice that made sense because of where they were. The technology wasn't worse than Google's technology, at least that's what they told me, but it's just that the environment really meant that, you faced a different set of opportunities to use those assets in the right way, and that then leads you to different strategic choices. You see that in many other cases as well. If you look at the automotive industry, it's often that consumer demands are really critical. So if you look at your local market, those are the first consumers that you usually encounter. And their needs, their specific likes and dislikes really drive how you perceive the opportunity space around you. And so, if then the global market space looks a little bit different, you'll end up in a certain niche that is very much kind of shaped by the location you're coming from.
Could you give us some advice on how to mobilize the full potential of location for strategic purposes?
Yeah, I think first of all, you need to know your location. You really need to understand what's available around me. So what does the business environment look like in terms of skills, in terms of academic institutions, infrastructure, all this kind of stuff, as it is relevant to your business. So you have to understand, how do we stand there relative to locations where my competitors are located? Where are we stronger? Where's my location stronger? Where's my location weaker? I think then the second level is you need to understand what are the other businesses, what are the other economic activities that you find in your location. We see more and more that companies don't do it all in-house. They are basically part of an ecosystem, and you work with a lot of partners. And so you need to figure out, how does the unique mix of companies that you see in your location enable me to do things that companies in another location wouldn't do. So we're here in Boston, and here for one of the areas where this region is really great is medical devices. And medical devices is really at the intersection of a lot of strengths that exist in this region on biotech, but there's also a lot of strength in IT and mechanics and robotics and these kind of things. And so if you're able as a company to really tap into these different strengths that exist in this region, you're in a much better position than somebody in, let's say Pittsburgh, where they're good in robotics, but they're not quite as strong on biotech and not as good as on IT. So, you need to look at what are the other companies, my potential partners that I have locally that I can draw on. That's the external analysis, business environment, cluster composition. And then, of course, it's also up to you. What's your strategy? How does your strategy fit in? And you need to think about, that's a creative process. You need to think about, how do you build on these external conditions to develop a market position that is distinct and is sustainable compared to what your rivals can do in other locations.
Can we apply the same rules to small companies?
Yeah, I think, it sounds probably a little bit scary, when you hear, there's all this type of analysis that you need to do. But I don't think it needs to be. I think it can be applied at the level where it makes sense for small companies. For small companies, I think the role of other companies around you is particularly important. I talked to quite a number of entrepreneurs that started many companies and said, we traditionally looked at, the strength of the business plan and how good the management team was. And of course, these are very crucial factors. But what they also said is, with hindsight, it also depends on where they started the business. Because a small company does need support. You need to be able to buy supplies. You need to have suppliers that not just send you the thing through the mail, but if something breaks, you need to be able to discuss with them and say, okay, this is how I want to use it. So really try to understand, what is the business community around you, and how can you tap on their particular strength as you try to develop your business and kind of set your business model.
Do you observe similar approaches regarding the role of location among countries from different continents?
Well, I think there is a significant increase in the realization that location matters, and there's a lot of talk about place-based policies versus people-based policies and stuff like that. I don't think we have really converged yet on kind of one set of policies. So I think this is a period where people still try to figure out how do you look at this. Now, I work quite a lot with clusters, and so that has been a theme, especially in Europe, where there are a lot of policy efforts. And those have, I think, generated good results, but they are not sufficient yet. And I think there's also huge heterogeneity in terms of what people actually do on the ground when they talk about clusters. The new catchphrase in Europe is smart specialization, which really has a lot to do with clusters, but essentially says, well, it's not enough to just focus on what you're already good at. Many regions need to think about diversification and structural change. And so how do you, rather than just, wouldn't it be nice to have an IT cluster, identify clusters where you actually have a shot, given where you currently are in terms of economic specialization. So I think we're getting there and having more and more practical tools, but it hasn't really come together yet as kind of one new agenda or dogma that could be applied.
What is the link between low-cost strategy and location?
So I think economic development is development through stages, and quite often the entry stage for the least developed countries is low cost, and low cost here is achieved because inputs cost little. Either natural resources or quite often labor doesn't cost much. And so I think there's nothing wrong with that, but it's an entry level. And the question is really, how do you move from that level to another level where the low costs are achieved through very high efficiency? And that requires kind of changing a wide range of policies. There is no one silver bullet, because productivity in an economy depends on a lot of factors, from the business regulation to skills to infrastructure and what have you. It's a very broad range of efforts. I've been able to do a lot of work on Vietnam over the last 2 years. And I think Vietnam is a very good example where they basically said, stage one is we just need to integrate our economy in the global economy to make sure that our poor people get a job. It's a poor paid job, it's a low productivity job, but it's still higher wage than what they would have gotten in subsistence agriculture. And I think that has driven in Vietnam huge prosperity gains over the last couple of years. Now, but the next level has to be, of course, that these people become more productive. To achieve that, you need to think about your education system, about your infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. So there's a broad range of things. Taking these things in steps and thinking about what's the next level that you can reach and how can you kind of rephrase the competitive advantages of your location, I think that's a critical question for economic development strategies.
Thank you. That was Christian Ketels, member of the Harvard Business School faculty at Professor Michael Porter's Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness.